Allow me to introduce myself.
I am the last sane sports fan.
I am a genius by trade.
I just knew too much. Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Possibly.
Hello everyone and welcome once again to The View from the Midwest. I know that I'm a few days late and probably a few dollars short as well, so if you want to help out with that, maybe I'll start a GoFundMe page. But let's get right into the NFL, as that is the show that we are doing today. Talking a little bit about the week that was. Over the weekend, obviously we'll include everything from way back almost a week ago now on Thursday when the Rams played against Tampa Bay. And obviously all the way through Monday. But let's get started with all the scores. The Cowboys lose to the Jets 19-16 as things continue to unravel for the Cowboys. The Cowboys had to use Kellen Moore as their quarterback as they've got just tons of quarterback issues right now. He was pretty bad, 158 yards, 1 touchdown, but 3 interceptions. Darren McFadden led the way for the Cowboys with 100 yards rushing, and Dez Bryant had a touchdown as well receiving. But Dallas could only muster 1 touchdown all game. That came in the second quarter, field goal in each of the rest. And their defense just wasn't good enough to get it done ultimately, as 10 points in the fourth quarter kind of did them in. Otherwise, if they could have done a little better in the fourth quarter, they might have actually won that game, which would have been a little bit surprising given the way that their season has gone. But ultimately, they end up falling to a record of 4-10. The Jets improved to 9-5. Moving right along, the Bears and the Vikings. The Vikings keep themselves alive in the Northern Division as they improved their record to 9-5. Mirror opposites are the Chicago Bears as they are 5-9. And again, a scoreless first quarter and just kind of an inept offense ends up costing the Chicago Bears. Jay Cutler, not a terrible day, but nothing special. 2 touchdowns, 231 yards and a pick. Teddy Bridgewater, pretty much the same in yards, but 4 touchdowns. That was a big difference right there. Adrian Peterson was held under 100 yards, 63 yards rushing, no touchdowns. But Matt Forte couldn't get things going for the Bears, only 47 yards rushing. Nobody with that much of a big receiving day. Matt Forte is obviously the leading receiver for the Chicago Bears. Kind of shows you how their day went offensively. Chicago shut out in the first quarter, 7 points in the second and fourth, a field goal sandwiched in between there. The second quarter and the fourth quarter were kind of the deciding factors there as Minnesota got 10 and 14 in those with touchdowns in the other quarters as well. And it was really kind of a tale of Minnesota just dominating this one start to finish. I mean, the score, if you look at it quarter by quarter, is not too terribly bad. But the Bears lost every single quarter, and thus they couldn't do anything really to keep their playoff hopes alive. I'm not sure if they're mathematically done, but they're done. There's absolutely no chance that they're going to catch up to anybody now. They're guaranteed to have a losing season. There's no way that they can win the division. So I would have to assume that they are mathematically done, but I haven't looked at all the incarnations of what could go on in the NFC to know that that is 100% true. Some of the other games that went along, the Texans beat the Colts as the Texans actually take control of that division. Matt Hasselbeck did try to gut a performance out for the Indianapolis Colts as he was injured, but you could kind of tell that he was not 100%. Neither was the offensive line, which has caused problems for the quarterback position all year long for the Colts. Hasselbeck had 147 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. Brandon Weeden, who is now with the Texans, he didn't have that great of a day, but 105 yards and a touchdown. It got the job done. Blue, the leading rusher for either of the teams, he had 170 yards rushing, but had a fumble. Nobody had a score in the rushing yards. So Houston improves to 500, and that shows you how bad that division is right now, the AFC South. That Houston is in charge of that division right now, and they are 7-7. And Indianapolis, despite all their failings, are still in it. They are a game back. They obviously now do not hold the tiebreakers, I don't believe, against Houston. It would depend on who won the first game, and I can't remember off the top of my head. Not necessarily great journalism there, but what do you expect? I'm doing this by the seat of my pants, to be honest. But Indianapolis is 6-8. Indianapolis, both defenses were okay. Offenses were completely inept in the first quarter, scoreless. Indianapolis actually took a 10-3 lead before halftime, but then Indianapolis was shut out the rest of the way, and you just cannot have that. It's not going to serve you well going into any kind of future if you cannot score. 10 points is just not going to cut it against most teams. Moving right along, the Patriots destroy the Tennessee Titans as the Titans' year continues to kind of unravel. Zach Mettenberger had to play quarterback. He was the leading passer, 242 yards, 2 touchdowns. Pretty good day statistically, but 2 interceptions as well. You cannot give a team like the Patriots any extra opportunities, so you have to keep interceptions and turnovers to a minimum. Otherwise, Tom Brady will kill you. He had a pedestrian day for Tom Brady, 267 yards and 2 touchdowns. Nobody crossed the 100-yard marker in terms of rushing, so New England is 12-2. Almost a mirror opposite. Tennessee is 3-11. The sad thing is, statistically, I believe it is impossible, but just looking vaguely at the figures, it almost seems like Tennessee could rally and claim a playoff spot. Obviously, that is not true, but that division is so bad right now that would be funny if that actually happened. The Chiefs are one of the surprise teams in the league right now. They just find ways to get it done. They're not overly impressive, but they're just good enough on defense and barely just good enough on offense, although they had a banner day here against the Ravens as they won 34-14, improving their record to 9-5. Baltimore, who has completely fallen off the rails for whatever reason this year, is now 4-10. Alex Smith, again, just kind of a pedestrian day, getting it done. Don't turn the ball over. Just let the defense take care of things and let the game unfold as it will. 171 yards and a touchdown. West had 76 yards rushing and a touchdown, and the leading receiver was also under 100 yards. So offensively, they didn't do a whole lot, but they got enough points. They got enough defense. They got a couple turnovers, 2 interceptions against Jimmy Clausen, and that ended up being the difference. And again, Kansas City just kind of chipped away. They didn't necessarily wow you throughout the game, but they won each quarter. And as long as you do that, you're going to win ball games. They scored 14 in the first, 10 in the second, 10 in the fourth. Both teams shut out in the third. Baltimore shut out completely in the second half. And again, if you can't score throughout the game, you're not going to win. Kansas City did do that, whether it was offensively or defensively, it didn't matter. They did just enough, and they're keeping their hopes alive. They're 9-5. Keeping things rolling. They're not a lock for the playoffs yet, but they're almost guaranteed at this point, given the fact of the records that some of the other teams have. It would take quite a few losses towards the end of the season for them not to make the playoffs at this point. The Browns and the Seahawks. Seahawks win 30-13. Johnny Manziel had 161 yards and a touchdown, but pick. Again, for every time you think that he might be on the cusp of becoming a serviceable NFL quarterback, he just doesn't have a performance to really live up to that, and then he kind of strings those together instead of the opposite, to where he strings good performances together and then has maybe 1 or 2 bad games. Again, nobody had a great day here offensively. Russell Wilson is the exception to that, 249 yards passing and 3 touchdowns. Nobody crossed the 100-yard marker in terms of rushing. And again, Seattle improves to 9-5, keeping their playoff hopes alive as well, as they still have an outside chance of catching Arizona. That is going to take some help on Arizona's part to win the NFC West, but it is still possible. Cleveland obviously out of everything, as they've got too many teams in front of them, and they are 3-11 in the AFC North, so absolutely nothing going to happen there. as it is another sadly lost year for the Cleveland Browns. The Packers beat the Raiders 30-20 as Aaron Rodgers had 204 yards passing, a touchdown, and a pick. James Starks had 51 yards and a fumble. James Jones had 82 yards and a touchdown receiving. Green Bay keeps a slim lead in the NFC North as they are 10-4. They scored 14 in the first, 10 in the third, 6 in the fourth, and that ended up being kind of the difference as they got a shutout in the fourth quarter. Oakland is just good enough to make things close. They kind of keep themselves in games, but they don't win those tight games, and this was one of those examples where Oakland just couldn't come through with the victory as the Packers tried to keep their Super Bowl hopes alive. The Broncos, a heartbreaker for them. They were ahead for most of this game and end up losing by the score of 34-27. Brock Osweiler had almost 300 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, but a pick. To compare that with Ben Roethlisberger, who had 3 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. But again, it came down to defense in this one, and although the offensive statistics for the Broncos were not bad, a lot of that came in the first half. They scored 14 in the first, 13 in the second, nothing in the second. Obviously, Pittsburgh's defense came up to play. Denver's offense did not. So that combination is not going to lead to a victory for Denver, and that keeps the Chiefs in the hunt in that division as Denver falls to 10-4. Pittsburgh is now 9-5, keeping their playoff hopes alive as well, as they've had kind of an up and down season. But they just stayed steady, that Pittsburgh style. 7 points in the first, 6 in the second, 7 in the third, 4 in the fourth, or excuse me, 14 in the fourth, as they win 34-27. Disappointing day, and really opening that door wide open for Peyton Manning. Not that I think that he would have necessarily made the difference in that game, but if John Elway is of a mind to let Peyton Manning come back at all, I think this kind of game is the kind that would allow that, just because you can sit there and say, if nothing else, Peyton Manning is not going to allow his team to be shut out that often. So it was that kind of game for them. The Bengals beat the 49ers 24-14 as they surprisingly kind of picked up a win. A lot of people thought that they wouldn't be able to without their quarterback, but A.J. McCarron stepped in, did a decent job, 192 yards and a touchdown. Nothing offensively, statistically, all that spectacular for Cincinnati, but they improved to 11-3. They've all but locked up that division now. They are only a couple games ahead of Pittsburgh, but with only a few games remaining in the season, it is going to be difficult for the Steelers to catch up. Scoreless first, 21 points in the second, though, and that was the huge difference in that one. They only scored a field goal in the second half, but that ended up being just enough, as that second quarter was really the key for the Bengals, and they're going to need those kind of performances if they really hope to hold on to that division lead. Monday Night Football, Lions took down the Saints 35-27 as both teams are just constantly oscillating back and forth. Neither one is in really a position that is going to get them into the playoffs. Both are 5-9 now. Detroit got decent passing yards, 254 from Stafford, 3 touchdowns. Similar touchdowns for Drew Brees as he had 3, but he had 341 yards. Abdullah for Detroit had 77 yards rushing and a touchdown, but a fumble, only 54 yards for Hightower. And the Saints, excuse me, as I have a tickle in my throat, nobody all that big in offensive yards receiving. But again, when you get shut out in a quarter, when you cannot score at all, that ultimately ends up being a big difference, as Detroit just kind of chipped away 7 points in every quarter except the second, which they got 14, and New Orleans could only manage a field goal in the first half. They tried to come back in the second, but they only got 7 in the third, 17 in the fourth, and that was just not going to cut it. So we always end up with the St. Louis Rams, and they pulled off a victory, potentially their last home game in the Edward Jones Dome. I don't believe it is, but we can cover that in a different video. I will again try to cover that again later, but there's still always news coming out every day, so I'm trying to kind of gather everything together before I do a video about that officially. But Case Keenum had a decent day for him, 234 yards and 2 touchdowns. Ty Gurley only had 48 yards rushing, but he did have another score. Kenny Britt with a decent day with 71 yards rushing and a touchdown. But again, St. Louis scored most of their points in the first half. First quarter, 14. Second quarter, 7. Second half, 7 points, and then 3 in the fourth quarter. But their defense, I don't know if it's coaching, I don't know if it's scheme, or if it's just mentality, or what happened. But all of a sudden in the fourth quarter, a game that should have been a blowout was a blowout for 90% of the game. Ends up being a lot closer than it should have been. You hold a team that only had 6 points going into the fourth quarter to score 17. That just cannot happen. The Rams, with the win, improved to 6-8. Tampa Bay falls to 6-8. But St. Louis has got to get something going. The Rams, I suppose I should say, should get something going, because who knows what's going to happen with their future. I personally still believe that they will be in St. Louis. Perhaps I'm pulling the wool over my eyes, but again, as I said, that's a different video. Again, but the Rams need to find something. They looked like they had something going in the first half, and they carried it over into the second a little bit. But again, Jeff Fisher just likes to run and try to possess the ball so much. You cannot do that in today's NFL. When Ty Gurley is not rolling, you cannot run that kind of offense, because it just will not work with anybody else in terms of the running backs. And if you completely take the passing game out, the passing game isn't all that great to begin with. And then if you take it out of the arsenal altogether, you're inviting these kind of comebacks, and a team that is better than Tampa Bay probably would have finished the comeback and beaten the Rams, but unfortunately for Tampa Bay, and fortunately for St. Louis, it didn't end up happening that way, and the Rams pull off a victory. At least a good memory for those who were in attendance, if that is indeed the last game that they do play in St. Louis. And we'll have to see how that shakes out in the future. But that is the view from the Midwest. What are your views on the games that happened? Sorry for the lateness of this video. I'll try to be more on time next week. But as they say in Charles Dickens, I was making rather merry over the holidays as I had some family in town. And if I don't believe this will be the last video I do before Christmas, but if it is, Merry Christmas to all of you. Happy holidays to any of you who do not celebrate Christmas. But this is a good time of the year for everybody to be in a peaceful kind of mood and just try to be happy. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult with our various sports teams, but that's just kind of the way it is. That is the view from the Midwest. Comment, rate, and subscribe. But until the next time, I'll see you then.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much space.